If you have been following my journey out of Christianity, a good portion of this video may sound repetitious, as I am saying things which I've said before. That is what repetitious means: to repeat, over and over, again and again. Some of these points are contextualized differently, but I think they bear being repeated, both for gaining a deeper understanding of the issue and for my blatant effort of indoctrinating you to my point of view. Where we left off in the journey of my exodus away from the church, lest you think that everything that you've heard so far was the journey, it was not. Where we left off with was the revelation of Acts chapter 21 and the clear picture that we find in the book of Acts that Paul, upon returning to Jerusalem for the festival of Pentecost, that he goes to visit James and the elders, and they're just excited to report to Paul after hearing Paul's report about what he was doing amongst the Gentiles. They were just excited to report to Paul how many thousands, and when I say many thousands, I mean, I believe it's Kinnear's IVP commentary in the New Testament. Guess it's Keener, not Kinnear. His commentary says, regarding Acts 21, that James says literally that, quote, many thousands, unquote, believe. Keener says a minimum of 50,000, which, if taken at face value, would be 1/10 of Palestine's estimated Jewish population, and over 8 times the estimated number of Pharisees. That the use of the Greek there could be interpreted as 50,000 Jews who now believed in the message that was taken to them by the Jewish apostles. These were the apostles that actually, unlike Paul, these Jewish apostles actually walked and talked with JC. These Jewish apostles actually heard him on a day-to-day basis. Now, maybe to put some of this in a bit of context, imagine that JC for 3 years spent his time, a vast amount of his time, with these apostles. It seems that when he called them to come follow him, the storyline of the Gospels was that they left what they were doing and they began following him around. Now, if you were to read any one of the Gospels, if you were to sit down and actually read the stories, clearly there's a lot that's not there. And I'm not suggesting that the lot that isn't there can be found in, say, the Gnostic Gospels. Nor am I saying that everything that is there, I don't want to get into the argument about whether everything that is there he actually said or did, only to say that over a period of 3 years of his quote-unquote public ministry, with disciples in tow, that more could not have been learned from what both he did and said. In fact, I think one of the Gospels actually says so, actually says that there's so much more that could be written about even what he did post-resurrection. And so certainly if there's a lot more that could have been written about what he did post-resurrection, then there certainly is a lot more that could be said about the 3 years that he was in public ministry. Now, this to me is important to consider, that these Jewish elders, certainly James, the brother of JC, would have spent probably many years in company with J.C. before public ministry. We know that Jude, who wrote the book of Jude, or the letter, as small as it is reputed to be the brother of James and the brother of J.C. And they certainly knew him beyond what we read in the books of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, in the Synoptic Gospels, where we find the parables and the miracles and the many events throughout his ministry. Yes, I did not mention the book of John. We will talk about John later. Suffice it to say that most of John's writing essentially focuses in on a very small time period of his ministry just before the crucifixion. And as such, I'm going to exclude that from the discussion for now. But I think that might serve as a way of understanding that just as the rest of the Gospels don't talk about any of the things that we read about in the Gospel of John. In fact, of the 879 verses in the Gospel of John, only 39 of those verses can be found to be connected or to share part of the storyline that we find in the other Gospels. And naturally, given how much of the Gospels centers around the crucifixion itself and the resurrection, when you consider that most of the texts that actually are in common center around that, then you really have very little in common between the Gospel of John and the other three Gospels. And so, just as what we do have in the Gospel of John, of just the period before the crucifixion, none of which we find in any of the other Gospels. 96% of the Gospel of John is unsupported by any other version of the Gospel. And as such, I just want you to consider this, that if John could take a short period of his ministry leading up to the crucifixion and create a whole book out of it, then certainly there's a lot more in the other 3 years of the life of J.C. that we don't read about. And it would be foolish for us to conclude that the Gospels contain everything that he did. Nobody believes that. And this is my point. The question then is, how come the conclusion that the church comes to is that the Torah is no more, but the conclusion of those who walked and talked with J.C., who lived between the verses of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, who spent day in, day out with him, month in, month out, year in, year out for almost 3 years, that their conclusion to the message that they understood, to the interpretation that they placed on his teachings and on his parables, was not that the Torah had been done away with, was not that sacrifices had been done away with. That what they understood was that he came, and obviously from their behavior in Acts chapter 21, that them receiving his message and believing that he was the Messiah led them to become zealous for the law.